Now, our Hall of Fame. Our Hall of Fame category celebrates the most talented and influential figures from Britain's rich comic tradition. One name will be added each year, and over time, we hope it will come to represent the very finest that British comics have to offer. The third person to enter the British Comic Awards Hall of Fame is Posy Simmons. To talk about Posy's esteemed career thus far.
No, oh yes, no dancing. Okay, great. Okay. I'm actually going to give a short stop tour of Posy's career rather than try and tease every detail out in conversation, and I hope also just mainly to give so you could appreciate the length and breadth of her career and the amount of work she's done. So it's going to be hitting all the high notes, and then we'll go into a little bit of a chat, and we won't keep you too long because I know everyone's hungry.
And wants a drink too.
Yes, the siren call of the glasses of wine and beer. We're calling you all now, I'm sure. So anyway, Rosemary Simmons, Posy. Were you ever called Rosemary?
Only by school teachers.
Oh, right. And that you knew you were in trouble. Okay. Posy was born in Berkshire and educated at Queen's Anne School and then finished at the Sorbonne. She attended the Central School of Art and Design and quite quickly went into her career as an illustrator and cartoonist. So by the late 60s, she was already contributing to various newspapers, including The Sun, The Times, also Cosmopolitan, eventually The Guardian. And finally, in 1977, she started a daily strip for The Guardian called The Silent Three of St. Otolph's, which is a tribute to The Silent Three by Evelyn Flinders. And just as a sidebar, because you were talking about this earlier, it's quite interesting, is that Evelyn was an artist who worked with Amalgamated Press she started in 1928, and she did this series of girls' weeklies, and she did tons of work. You know, another one of these great early cartoonists and artists. So the Silent Three, your version of the Silent Three, was a homage to these girls' adventures, but where the protagonists are grown up and they're still continuing with their sort of adventures. You had Wendy Weber, Joe Heap, and Trish Wright were the three characters. And these strips were very popular, and they continued on, and they kind of became later known as Posy, I think, overall. And then they ran until the 1980s. And eventually these have been collected, so if you want to have a look at this work, there's various collections: Mrs. Weber's Diary, Pick of Posy, Very Posy, and Pure Posy. And there was also an original book with the same characters called True Love, which all of these you can get. And Posy also won in 1980 and 1981. She won Cartoonist of the Year, in both years. And then there were other cartoons, because there were always other cartoons. There weren't just these ones. And there's ones that she did for the Spectator and the Guardian, and they were also have been collected into a tome called Mustn't Grumble, and that came out in '93. And then she branched into writing and illustrating children's books. And you had Fred, which was about a cat with a secret life, and this, which came out in '87, and this eventually became an animated short film, which you scripted as well. And this was known as Famous Fred, and this short film came out in 1996. It was nominated for an Oscar, and it won several BAFTAs. And apart from that, there was many other books that she wrote during this period aimed at children, and which she also illustrated. You have Lulu and Flying Babies, The Chocolate Wedding, Mr. Frost, Baker Cat, Lavender. And during that period, you also wrote a screenplay for The Frog Prince. So, from what I understand, no?
Yes, somebody else kind of rewrote it.
Rewrote it, but you did. You did work.
Yeah, at the
Yeah.
beginning.
Okay. Well, you know, writers always get your credit.
It's
That's
part of the
important. Yeah. And then in the late 90s, you returned to The Guardian, and this is one of your kind of your better known works that people would remember today, which is Gemma Bovary, which is a reworking of Flaubert's Madame Bovary. It was published as a graphic novel in 1999, and it's recently been made into a French film called Gemma Bovary, which was directed by Anne Fontaine and co-written with Pascal Bonitzer, and that came out this year. So it's amazing when you think it's often how long projects take to go from one to another, from finished in 99 and then as a movie in 2014. And along with that you have the Literary Life cartoons, which came out between 2004 and 2002 and 2004 in The Guardian, and they've also been collected into a compilation known as Literary Life. And in 2002 you were made a member of the Order of the British Empire for services to the newspaper industry.
Whatever they were.
Making people laugh, I think. And your most recent work is Tamara Drew. And this began in The Guardian in September 2005 and was partly inspired by Thomas Hardy's Far from the Madding Crowd. The complete work was finished and published in 2007, and it's been translated into French, German and Swedish, and it won the prestigious Prix de la Critique in 2009 at the Angoulême, sorry, I'm terrible at French, International Comics Festival. It's been adapted into a feature film, which was written by Moira Buffini and directed by Stephen Friars in 2010. And there was a retrospective of Posy's work, which was in 2012, and that was in Belgium at the Belgian Comics Book Centre, I think, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Paul Gravatt, who some of you may have heard of, said of Posy that she is simply one of the world's most sophisticated contemporary cartoonists, expanding the scope and subtlety of the graphic novel. And I think that's a very good summary. She has an astute and laser-sharp ability to create memorable and complex characters with a sly wit and a flawless sense of timing. Her artistic style has developed into an effortless and evocative line work that other artists would love to emulate because, as the Brazilian writer Clarice Lispector once wrote, "I only achieve simplicity with enormous effort." So, recently, Posy was interviewed talking about various things in one of the newspapers, and she referred to herself as an invisible woman because she likes to go unnoticed and make notes in her notebook when she's looking at ideas for characters and stories and draw them. But I think today we're honouring her for the legacy of her work and her very visible contribution to British cartooning and comic book art. So that's the summary there. So you can do a little round of applause. But someone said recently when I said I was going to talk to Posy today, she mentioned that 30 years ago she saw your work in the newspaper and she wanted to do what you did.
Oh,
So-
I'm glad.
Yeah. And I was wondering, when you were starting out, what were the comics that you read that made you want to, did you start really, how early can you kind of remember comics being part of your life?
I'm right back in 2, 3, 4, I can remember looking at comics. And then when I was about 8, some Americans moved into the village where I lived, and they used to go to an air base every Saturday and come back with tons of comics. And of course I read them there, but they often used to say, "Oh, Posy, do you want to take some comics?" And I was thinking, yes, so I would have tons, and they were all mine. And I suppose if Proust had a Madeleine as a thing which brought back, to me, it's lying in the sun with an American comic on my face, and it's the smell of the ink. And I go, oh, comics. But after I was 10, of course, I probably didn't read comics for, decades. Because in those days, in the 50s, sadly, comics were thought really for children, and you were supposed to grow out of them. So now it's a wonderful time for everybody.
And you were always making them at home, weren't you?
Yes.
You was drawing them, and you were stapling them. You were actually making like little books.
Yes, yes. Those sort of horror comics. Or some of them were advice. I remember writing one when I was about 9 called How to Make Love and Be Loved in 4 Easy Lessons.
At 9.
My mother was horrified, but actually it was very innocent. It was just about dropping handkerchiefs.
If only it were so simple. And the interesting thing is you did see this as something you wanted to do like early on.
Yes, I always liked the combination of words and pictures. Really simple as that. I did graphic design at art college, and at that time the course was mainly typographical. So, and in those days, in sort of dinosaur times, you had to actually hand draw lettering, which has stood me in good stead. So when I left art school, I did that awful round that people do now in a more sophisticated way, but it's showing your work. And the very first things I got were really in newspapers, and that was my work ever since, really, in newspapers.
And what do you like about doing a kind of ongoing work in newspapers like you've done with Tamara Drew and John Wilbury?
Well, I have to say by the end I didn't like the deadline. I mean, having been used to deadlines because newspapers always made you work very fast, and so you never had time for second thoughts. Actually doing a serial, I thought, well, start with about 20 episodes, but in fact it was a slog, and by the end I was only about 2 or 3 episodes ahead, so it was real. So I could have done without those sort of deadlines. But I like, people said, why on earth didn't you write the whole thing before you started, and then you wouldn't have had all this. But it doesn't work like that you get most of your own ideas, or I do, under pressure. And I like the idea of being on this story, which was a kind of like a hatching creature. I didn't quite know where it was going.
And you were saying that you had one time where you wrote, it was published twice in a week, and you did one, and you literally didn't know what you were doing for the next one.
Oh yes, that was a bad day. I had to deliver 2 at a time. I'd done the first one, and I just didn't know. I didn't know what's going to happen. So I just did a queue in a supermarket, and as a kind of, and then thought, oh, I've got Saturday, Sunday, Monday to think what happens.
But it came in the end.
It came in the end.
So very good. And if you, thinking about your career, if you were to give advice, I know maybe people hate asking this question, but for people who want to do comics or cartoons, I mean, what would you say is your main advice you would give to them?
I would say leaving college, or not, if you're starting out, August is a brilliant time to find work, especially in newspapers or magazines, because people go on holiday, but they still need their issues filled, and that's how I got things in August. And they would ring you up and just, they'd go through, who's been in, and so you were a kind of dog's body, but it was a good way of getting started. And the second thing I would say is just keep a notebook and draw and write down things you hear on buses or wherever.
Yeah, okay. And yeah, I think we'll wrap it up because I don't want to let the go on too long and hear the stomachs grumbling and the snores coming from the audience. I'd like to thank Posy for coming along today.
Well, I'd like to thank you very, very much for this great honour.